Hello, welcome to another edition of Pierce Brothers. I'm Brian Pierce, and today we're going to be covering Uberti Single Action revolvers, mainly the 1873s. There's a lot of misconceptions about them. They're a great revolver, especially considering where they're priced at. But let's just dive into a little bit the technical side of them. We'll shoot a couple of them, but let's talk about their history a little bit first. Uberti's been in business since 1959. They're based out of Italy, and they started business by doing replica classic Old West guns, and they've made some great stuff. They're famous for their King Patton rifles, which include the Winchester 1860 replica or the Henry 1860. Of course, the 1866 Winchester Yellow Boy and the 73s. Those are great rifles. They did a big version of 76 as well. But back to the single actions. I couldn't nail down a date when they first started offering those, but it's been more than 50 years. So now let's clarify a little bit. Unfortunately, when they first started making them, they were a little crude. They were a little homely. Most of them had brass back straps and trigger guards. You see them in a lot of old westerns, but they just were crude. Flutes were terribly shaped. The overall quality wasn't good. Even worse, their spring quality was not good at all. Their bolts broke frequently, and so they just didn't have the greatest reputation. And that has slowly changed as they've improved quality, improved the aesthetics of the gun a lot. The fit and finish has become very good, and there's a lot of people in the industry who have been responsible for that, mostly in the American gun trade, because the Italians aren't really in touch with the American market, and so they needed coaching, if you will. And one of those was Mike Harvey of Cimarron, and he began importing Uberti. I believe it was 1984. He worked extensively with Uberti. There was others. It wasn't just Mike that did that, but there were others that were involved in that. Navy Arms was one of the early importers, and they did a lot to bring them along in quality. Let's fast forward to the 90s, and that's when the quality we saw a real uptick in the quality of the guns, and they became much more attractive. Their rifling and barrel quality became much better. Today I've shot a lot of Uberti revolvers, and generally speaking, they shoot very well. They brought the chamber dimensions down as they should. Most of them have throats that measure 452, so it corresponds with a groove diameter, kind of like original Colts did. There's been so much published about original Colts, and I don't want to divert here, but early Colts had very tight throats and chambers, and they were the bore diameter, even though it's been published many times, they claim was 454 inch, but it was not. It was spec'd at 450, and then when the smokeless powder guns came in, that spec was changed to 451 to 452 inch, and Uberti follows those same specs. So let's just grab a kind of a fairly recent example here. This gun has that light colored blue finish that they do. That's been quite popular. It's not the most durable bluing that they do, but this is on the black powder frame, and I'm gonna just show you something here a minute. Let's go to more of a dark color here. Here's an original Colt. This gun was made in Colt 1873 Single Action Army Peacemaker, whatever you want to call it. This particular gun is a 45 Colt. It was made in 1900 and shipped to Colt's agency in San Francisco, California, and it's got kind of some interesting marks on the frame. It had some kind of a history. I believe it was actually a prison guard gun, but it's really rare in that by 1900 Colt had done away with the one-piece walnut stocks on civilian guns, and it was no longer supplying military guns. So this gun was probably special ordered, or it could have been just leftover parts that Colt was trying to get used up. But what's more interesting is this gun has notches on it, and I'm trying to verify some of the history, but again, we're just going to look at a Uberti and a Colt side by side, and you can see they very similar in overall shape and design, but there are some pretty significant differences, and let's talk about those a minute. The Uberti, well, let's back up. The Colt, it has an outside cylinder dimension, and all Colt single actions have had this, of 1.650 inch, 1.650 inch. And just for demonstration purposes, I'll put a caliper on there, and this one's 1.49, it's around 1.49 or 1.649 inch. So depending on the amount of wear on the cylinder, the polisher at the time, there can be a few thousandths difference in that figure. Ubertis, on the other hand, they went to a little different pattern, and to the casual observer, they'll never see it, but the Ubertis generally measure 1.670 to 1.675 inch. So you're probably looking at it going, well, Brian, what's the big deal over 20 or 25 thousandths bigger diameter cylinder? Well, it is actually very significant, and here's why. The a little bit hard to explain, but the axis of the base pin is from the axis of the base pin to the axis of the bore. The measurement remains the same on a Uberti or a Colt, but so what that 20 or 25 thousandths bigger cylinder diameter does is it adds the strength right over the bolt notches. Why that is so significant is that that's the weak link in a Colt single action, is right over the bolt notches. They actually get really thin right there, and if you look closely, that bolt notch rests right over the chamber, and if you measure that, it's really thin right there. In fact, you can see guns that have been shot with heavy loads or overloads. That's the first thing that bulges out from the inside of the chamber, and Uberti basically doubled the strength of the gun right there. And then that's going to bring us into a quick discussion of the strength of the Ubertis. I kind of say, during the mid-90s, Uberti upped the quality of their stills. They use what's known as it's very similar to US 4140 or 4130 series chromoly, which is a very tough steel. Ruger uses it. It's kind of a standard in the industry. Very tough, durable metal. And Uberti uses a European grade of the same steel. So the Recoil, very similar, 35 plus. So Uberti, of course, the most popular caliber, and it's been offered many calibers, 38 special. They even made 22s, but 38 special, 3840, 357 mag, 4440, 3840, 45 Colt, and of course that's the most popular, but they also chambered it in 45 ACP. The reason that's significant is the 45 Colt runs 14,000 PSI by industry standards. So SAMI, the Sporting Arms and Ammunition Manufacturers Institute, establishes pressures that cartridges are supposed to be loaded at by SAMI companies. And with 45 Colt, in deference to the old Colts, the early Colts especially, they limit it to 14,000, and so that's a maximum load. And the interesting thing is Uberti, of course, offers dual cylinders, so you can get it in 45 ACP as well, and that runs 21,000 PSI or 23,000 when using plus P loads. So that now to show you proof is in rough numbers 30% more than that, and so it's these guns have to stand basically 30,000 PSI loads to pass proof and before they can be sold to the consumers. So these guns are proofed at that level, and this is the reason I'm leading into this, is that some people question if you can use a plus P load in a Uberti, and if yes, my comment is yes. If it's been made in the last 30 years, you can, but not Ruger large frame plus P loads, just loads that run similar pressure to the 45 ACP. Don't want to dwell on that point too long, but it's an important point because there's been a lot of criticism that I've taken that position, but I've destruction tested scientifically many guns using proof loads and I would not send you a send you on a dangerous mission to destroy a gun or damage a gun or hurt yourself. So the design of the Uberti has changed over the years. It is patterned after the Colt Single Action, but there are some changes. Now, to help you understand those changes, there's a test that's required to import guns, and it's called the drop test. And the Colts won't pass, neither will the Ubertis, unless they have some kind of a safety system. So there's what's known as a Swiss safety, and try to find one that's easy to pull the base pin on here. This is a standard procedure on any single action for cleaning purposes and so forth. But you bring the gun to half cock, you remove the base pin and the cylinder. Allows you to clean the barrel, the inside of the frame, clean the cylinder chambers and so forth. It's a real standard procedure. But if we look at this versus a Colt, let's pull this original Colt. Let's pull the base pin on that gun. And if you look at those, there's two circular cuts that either the cross pin, or if you're using a black powder style frame, that the set screw goes into to hold that base pin. And in the Uberti gun, the way that they allow that to drop past the drop safety test is that you put that on the second slot. So the base pin goes in deep, turn in your set screw, and now if you watch, the hammer cannot go and contact the cartridge. So it can be drop test all it want in that position. You can hit it the force, whatever you want. It's not going anywhere. It's not going to fire, and that's one way that they pass the drop test. So here's actually a really nice old Galco Trail Boss rig, very popular in the cowboy action shooting market. But this gun is has a hammer safety within it, and they're quickly identifiable because if you look in the back of the hammers, of course both these are Ubertis, but you look in the back, you'll see a little mechanism right here that with a spring loaded, and this one is void of it. Okay, so this one is more of a Colt pattern, whereas this one, you move this back and you actually will see this little bar right here, and that's hard to catch with your fingernail. It slips down. It's not technically a transfer bar, it's more of a hammer block system, but that engages when you put it in this position. And in this position, they will pass a drop test, whatever. I personally don't use that notch because it's not difficult for the hammer to come back slightly and go down. If you going through brush, riding, bump it with your elbow, anything, it doesn't take much for that hammer to come out of that notch and drop back to that position. You won't know it, and then you're resting on a live cartridge and it's ready to fire. The other problem with this system is that it takes the hammer cam and it made it smaller and it repositioned it, and so it's a little more difficult to time guns up correctly, and they will also wear out the bolt the bolt quicker because it's smaller. And so I generally kind of avoid those. I prefer the later system that they've now adapted. There's actually now a third one. Cimarron refers to it as their newer model version, but it's let me see if I can find one here. This is actually the only one I have, but if you notice, it doesn't have the traditional 4 clicks that you hear with the single action, or neither does it have the first safety notch. First so-called safety notch, I should say. In other words, there's nothing there to catch. It has this one actually has a true transfer bar system, and it actually has a firing pin that floats in and out. But when that safety is engaged, you can see how that trigger goes back and forth. When the trigger goes forward, that mechanism retracts the firing pin. So the firing pin's present, but it cannot touch the cartridge. So you can put a live round in there, hit it all you want with a mallet, it won't go off. It's actually a good system. I just kind of prefer the old one. I still carry a single action with 5 cartridges. The typical fashion has always been to just load 1 cartridge, skip a chamber, load 4, and then bring it to full cock and let the hammer down, and you can confirm that you got an empty chamber by looking on the sides right here in the back, the breech end of the cylinder, and you'll see the firing pin protrude through, and you can see whether you have a cartridge under the hammer or not. Once you've mastered it and done it a few times, it's like, oh, that's real easy to do. So just proper single action carry is important for safety reasons. A good example of that would be why we don't do this. We might as well cover this subject before we move on. Got a case here that no powder, no bullet, just a primer. So we're just going to slip it in the chamber. We're going to position it directly under the hammer. We're going to bring the hammer, well, if the hammer, we can do a more extensive test on this later, but it doesn't take much of a blow to set it off. Again, that was only a primer, but it just a very light strike. And man, I don't know about you, but I'd hate to have that in my holster and sending a 250 grain bullet down my leg. Ugh, that would hurt. So that's one of the reasons that we really must carry single action safety for yourself and for those around you. There have been many documented cases where guns have fallen out of holsters. I'm aware of a case where a gun slid out of the back seat of a car, hit the ground, fired, went up through the seat, and killed a passenger. So it's important. And yet, if applied correctly, if carried correctly, there's not a more safe handgun out there than a single action. So let's talk about a few of Uberti's models. Here's an interesting one. This is a civilian version, if you will, of an 1873, and just for fun, there it sits beside an original Colt, and Uberti just calls it, this one's imported by Cimarron Arms. Here it is by an original Colt. This Colt was made in 1875, 100% original, except the front sight was shaved down at one point, maybe is worn down, I don't know. But again, in 1875 versus a modern Uberti, and Uberti did what's known as their original finish on this gun. Boy, it could pass as a very old gun at a glance very easily. And yet you got a modern gun, modern stills. It's a great shooter. Here's a nickel-plated gun that has Elkhorn stocks on it with a carved steer head on it. Very attractive gun. The interesting thing about this gun, it's got the black powder style frame, but it's got a resemblance of a Colt in a circle here. This was imported by Marie Uberti at Uberti USA many years ago, and this gun, the reason it's got a Colt on that, along with serial numbers like a Colt during the black powder era, is that Colt was actually considering having Uberti build the single action army for them. So Uberti made them up some samples, sent them to Colt, and this is one of the ones that was a sample gun that went to Colt. Of course, Colt never did that, but that was something that Marie was working on before she passed away. Here's this one. I talked about this earlier. Here's one with fire blue finish and a very attractive gun. This one came with kind of a factory action job. Very nice. Here's a 7.5 inch U.S. cavalry type of gun. Got the inspector's mark, U.S. stamping on the frame. Bullseye ejector. You know, black powder style frame with the retention screw in the front. Serial numbered and marked according to the inspectors, and yet here's a modern gun. You can go out and shoot all day, any reasonable load. Here's a pair that's kind of interesting. These are currently offered by Cimarron. They're the Buffalo Bill tribute gun. They're not commemoratives, they're tribute guns. They don't say anything about Buffalo Bill on them or anything, but they're very attractive. These are the same guns as they put on the front cover of their catalog recently. They're laser engraved and they're patterned after the gun that Buffalo Bill was famous for carrying. His was originally a Frontier 6 shooter, so it was 4440. Had black rubber grips on it instead of the one-piece walnut, which I'd like to see Uberti do that, but it's a very intricate pattern. But again, this is laser engraved, not hand engraved, and it only adds a modest amount to the price of the gun. and yet it's a very attractive gun, one that you can go shoot and use. Here's a variation of the Ubertis. They offered it in a flat top target. Here's an original Colt flat top target from the 1890s, and this particular gun was originally a 450 Ely, but it was Elmer Keith sent it back to the factory in 1929 and had it rebarreled and recylindered to 44 Special, and that gun's a really good shooter. But the flat top target had a drift adjustable rear sight and a set screw, of course a blade style front sight, and it was an early target revolver. Did well in England on the target ranges there. A lot of them went to England for that purpose, but they made less than 1,000 of those guns, and they're very rare. And yet now you can get a modern reproduction. Most people don't go for the target guns because they always think of the Colt as a fixed sight, traditional, very handsome gun, which they are. But it's a variation I'm fond of. I much like those. Here's another. Let me put this one out of the way here briefly. Here's another laser engraved one. This one's unique in that it's stainless, and it's interesting that here's another stainless 5.5 inch. It's interesting, and this is kind of an area of concern with Ubertis. It's probably overstated from what it should be, but if you look at this little donut shaped thing right here, it's called a recoil plate, and if you look closely on the inside of the frame, this stainless gun has a recoil plate that surrounds the firing pin hole, and that's removable. It can be tapped out from the rear, and typically you take the barrel out. You have a centering tool that comes in from the front, and you set in the new one and you stake it. And Colt's had those from day one, since 1873. Uberti has never had them, and it's been if you have a gun that has a firing pin alignment issue, it will peen that hole out and make it where it drags, causes burrs. Cylinders or cartridges can drag on the recoil plate, or the recoil plate area, I should say. And so, but if they align well, it's probably not too much of a problem. But this is a very hardened piece of steel. I wish that Uberti would put recoil plates in all their guns, but at this point, the only ones that are doing it in is stainless. There's another feature that I would like to see, or that I greatly appreciate about the Uberti, is the removable bushing in the cylinder. The reason this is important is I'm kind of an accuracy-minded person, and these bushings, when they become worn, where you have cylinder end shake that develops from natural use and firing and so forth, that bushing, a new bushing, can be fit by anybody at home very easily. Just install a new cylinder bushing and take the cylinder end shake out. You want very minimal end shake here in the gun, just enough that it rotates freely. I keep a light amount of oil or grease on the cylinder, both front and rear of it, which minimizes that wear. And cleaning that should always be removed and cleaned each time. It prevents it from getting rusted in or frozen in there. But that's one great feature that I very much enjoy that Uberti has done, is stayed with that Colt pattern bushing, and it will accept Colt bushings, by the way. But that's not necessary because the Uberti parts are readily available. Uberti uses good barrel stock. I've tested them at long range with a variety of ammunition, and man, some of them I've been very, very impressed with the accuracy. They combined with their tight chambers and throat dimensions that normally run 451 to 452, at least with more modern Ubertis. It was a time back in the 70s and 80s when they weren't producing guns with good tight throat dimensions, but the bullet basically has minimal tilting as it passes from the chamber into the barrel. Forcing cones are cut at about 11 degrees, which is ideal. I've ranged many of these guns. Chambers are perfectly dead on. Uberti's done a very good job with the single action. So here we can see the simplicity of the Colt pattern design. Of course, it's parts are always easy to replace to repair guns. This particular gun is one that has the sliding safety within the hammer. We're going to show you a little bit how that works. To show you a more conventional hammer, this is also a Uberti hammer. They changed where the bolt positioning is a little bit, which kind of messes with your timing a little bit. The early ones were actually very small, this hammer cam. And if you look closely, when I take this one, of course, this is the one that has the safety mechanism. You watch this hammer block. When you put it in that first notch, see that move down? But only if it moves out, the gun's gonna fire. It doesn't take much. So I don't really trust this system. It gets them through import safety drop. The best way is to just carry 5 rounds. Now, for those that say it's safe to carry it with just the standard first cock notch, which, if you'll remember, just keep the camera in there. It's just right there. That's all that is. Okay, so this first cock is going right there into that notch. Now, the hammers break pretty regular, but the trigger sear, the tip of the trigger, it doesn't take much to just break that tip off, and it goes right up. And again, they won't pass the hammer or the drop safety test, which is basically the way the gun dropped from 3 feet on the hammer. They will break and fire. So that's why, no, we don't carry them with 6 rounds. And that's back in the day. Colt thought it was a good enough safety back in the 1870s, but it didn't take them long to figure out it wasn't the best idea. And of course, currently Colt absolutely says do not carry 6 rounds. So Uberti, same position. They don't carry 6 rounds regardless. So yeah, that addresses that. But again, the simplicity of this, one feature that the Uberti has, we've got this apart, is that Colt originally used if I can find it, a hand in this pattern here with a leaf spring. The spring wasn't hard to replace. You can see it slotted, but it occasionally broke. With modern steels or modern springs from Tolan and Wolf and some of these, we don't see them break very often, especially if the gun's timed and tuned up properly. But Uberti had tackled that by just going to a different style hand. That, if I didn't take this apart, but you see this little tiny set screw right here, that holds a spring that is like a Ruger old model that has a spring that runs through the frame, and it keeps the pressure on the back of the hand to positively turn the cylinder. Good system that never breaks. A coil piano wire coil spring just doesn't break. But again, modern Ubertis with good springs. Another common spring is the bolt and trigger spring. This, of course, activates the trigger. This, of course, keeps pressure on the bolt here to make it positively come in and lock into the cylinder notches. And in the old days, this broke quite a bit because they used a very heavy one, and the spring steels weren't as good as what we use today. If somebody's really concerned about that, we have wire springs that they can be replaced with. But again, modern springs, I've got guns that literally have 20,000 rounds through them, never broke a spring in them. So yeah, good solid sound design. Incidentally, they do use forged frames on Ubertis. They're good, tough steel. Very good gun for the money, hard to beat. Okay, well, that kind of concludes for now what we're going to cover on Ubertis. They're a company that I'm very impressed with how they've progressed and have modernized to a great single action. Considering what they cost, even brand new retail out of a store, they're an incredible value. I'd hate to build the gun for that. They're quality throughout. There's an area or two I've touched on I'd like to see them improve, but they're very good guns. We will do more coverage on them as new models and such become available. We'll also cover the model 1875 Uberti at some point, and the Pietas. The Pieta is a distinctly different gun than the Uberti, and we'll discuss all that. So we'll be doing a Pieta video before too long. In the meanwhile, yeah, buy a Uberti. They're great. They're a great gun. Great gun for the money. In fact, they were good enough that when U.S. Firearms first started business in 1993, they used Uberti frames for the first 7 years of manufacture. They would they would go in and do the finish in U.S. They'd put American-made barrels and cylinders in the frames, recoil plates, and eventually Doug Donnelly, the owner of USFA, built an entirely new facility and built guns 100% in U.S., but there was absolutely nothing wrong with the Uberti framed USFAs. They were great guns. No apologies necessary for those guns. So again, I'm always impressed. I've been very impressed with Uberti quality, and been interesting to watch this company grow and change with the times. So and I think they've been incredibly popular with cowboy action shooters, and many of them shoot 1,000 rounds a week every week. So good gun. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you soon.